Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are wrestling with a ghost. It is a ghost that has been haunting the Indian economic story for the better part of 2 decades.
It really has.
And you know exactly what I'm talking about. You have seen the logos plastered on billboards. You have heard the speeches thundering from the Red Fort, the mechanical line of "Make in India," the inevitable, almost religious promise that the next great factory of the world was destined to be, simply had to be, in South Asia.
It is the headline that never changes. Every single year for 20 years, it feels like we are perpetually on the cusp.
Yes, always on the cusp.
We're always just one policy tweak away from glory. And yet, if you actually look at the hard data, the story just refuses to align with the slogan.
Exactly. And that is why we are doing this today. We are stripping away the marketing, the PowerPoint decks, and frankly, the relentless optimism to look at the rusty machinery underneath.
It's time for a reality check.
Because the reality check we have to start with is brutal. We have to be honest here. For 20 years, India has been shouting these slogans. Make in India, launched officially way back in 2014. But if you look at the scoreboard, well, the home team isn't winning.
It is concerning. It's not just a stagnant score. In some ways, relative to the competition, it's a losing score.
Think about it. Think about the golden opportunities that have just floated by. I mean, opportunities that theoretically should have been slam dunks for India.
Absolutely.
We had the post-2008 financial crisis where global supply chains first started getting jittery. Everyone was talking to diversification then. Did they move to India?
For the most part, no. A little bit, but not the floodgates.
Mostly no. Then we had the trade war, the U.S. and China. Tariffs everywhere. Panic in boardrooms across the world. Everyone screaming diversification.
The China plus one strategy, that became the mantra.
Exactly. And then the biggest catalyst of them all, COVID.
The ultimate stress test.
Right. The pandemic.
Yeah.
The world basically put up a giant flashing neon help wanted sign for a new manufacturing hub. The supply chain managers of the world were desperate to leave China.
They needed a plan B urgently.
And when the dust finally settled, where were the new factories?
They were in Vietnam, they were in Bangladesh, they were popping up in Thailand, and even Mexico, believe it or not.
And India was, for the most part, watching from the sidelines. It captured some assembly work, sure, a few phone assembly plants here and there, but it did not capture the momentum. It didn't become the default second option.
That's a perfect way to put it. The momentum went elsewhere.
And that is the central tension we are exploring today. Why? Why does this promise remain so unfulfilled? And to answer that, we aren't looking at the usual suspects. We're not going to spend an hour complaining about potholes or bureaucracy or how hard it is to get a permit.
No, that is too easy. And frankly, it is a bit lazy. Everyone knows the roads could be better. That doesn't explain a 20-year strategic failure. That's a symptom, not the disease.
We are basing today's deep dive on a really fascinating and, I have to say, somewhat provocative set of sources. We're looking at a piece from the blog Barack Face, specifically a post dated January 28, 2026, titled, "Why India Keeps Missing the Manufacturing Moment."
And this source references a killer concept from the economists Jostein Hao and Ha-Jun Chang, and this is really the hook.
It is. Go on.
They argue that India hasn't failed to industrialize because of incompetence. They argue that India's elites, the people actually running the show, might actually oppose industrialization.
That just stops you in your tracks, doesn't it? The idea that it's not an accident, but a choice.
It completely flips the script. Usually when you read an op-ed about why India isn't the next China, you hear about, labor laws being too rigid or land acquisition being a nightmare. And our source admits, yes, those are real problems.
Sure they are.
But it calls them symptoms. The mission of this deep dive is to look at the civilizational choices India made. Choices regarding money, patience, and political courage.
It is a journey into the political economy. So, for you, our listener, buckle up. Here is the roadmap for this long haul. We are going to start with the diagnosis. Finance versus factories. Why the way money works in India might be killing the way things are made.
Then we move to the will to wait, or the lack thereof. The R&D crisis. We have some numbers there that are honestly shocking.
Then we're going to perform an autopsy on Make in India. Why was it just a brand and not a real strategy?
And crucially, we will look at the Make in India 2.0 blueprint proposed in the source, which suggests some pretty radical interventions to, and this is the key word, discipline capital.
And finally, we end with a simulation, a debate between the China of 1995 and the India of 2025. Two different models of growth colliding. It is going to be a fascinating ride. So let's jump into part one. the diagnosis, finance over factories.
Let's do it.
Whenever I talk to friends in business about India, the conversation, it always goes to the inspectorage or the red tape. The government is in the way. But our expert source says, stop looking at the red tape. Look at the bankers. Look at the financiers.
Precisely. The source material makes a distinction that is so often missed in mainstream business news. It argues that the root cause of India's industrial stagnation is the, and I'm quoting here, dominance of finance over production.
Okay, let's unpack that because it sounds a bit academic. Dominance of finance. What does that actually look like on the ground for, say, a company trying to build something?
Okay, so think about the Indian economic elite. The people running the biggest conglomerates, the banking families, the real estate tycoons. The source argues they are deeply financialized.
Financialized.
It means they operate with a logic that demands quick returns. Capital money must be liquid. It needs to be able to move in and out of investments fast. Very fast.
Okay, so they want to flip assets. They want to see the stock price go up this quarter, not in 5 years. They want to buy a company, maybe strip some value out of it, and then move on to the next deal.
Exactly. It's an arbitrage mindset. In India, you get rich by buying something cheap and selling it expensive without necessarily adding any fundamental value in between. But here is the problem.
What's that?
Serious industrialization. I mean, building a car industry from scratch or a semiconductor ecosystem or a biotech hub, that does not work that way.
Right, you can't flip a semiconductor fab. It's not a house in a hot market.
No, absolutely not. It requires what economists call gestation periods. You had to sink billions of dollars into the ground, into highly specialized machines, into training thousands of people. And here's the kicker. You might not see a single rupee of profit for 5, maybe 10 years.
You're in the red for a decade.
A full decade. And the argument from our source is that the Indian elite is simply not willing to wait that long. They can make more money faster doing other things.
So they want liquidity, not factories.
They want liquidity. And the source contrasts this so starkly with history. Look at every single country that successfully pulled this off: Germany in the 19th century, Japan post-war, South Korea, Taiwan. Even the USA back in its industrializing phase.
What do they all have in common?
They all had long periods where finance was subordinated to production.
Subordinated. That's a strong word. It implies a hierarchy. It means the bankers were told, you are second. The factory owner, the engineer, the builder, they are first.
In a way, yes. It was a conscious national project. In those successful countries, during their big growth phases, shareholder payouts were restrained, often by law.
So you couldn't just strip profits out of the company.
Exactly. Profits weren't immediately stripped out to buy yachts or real estate in London. They were forced, either by regulation or by intense state pressure, back into the company. Reinvested into better machines, into R&D, into expansion. The state actively shaped capital flows to ensure the money went to factories, not speculation.
And India just never made that choice after the reforms in 91.
India never made that choice. In fact, it went in the opposite direction. It liberalized finance much faster than it liberalized industry. In India, the quickest way to get rich is through arbitrage. You get rich through asset inflation, buying land and just waiting for it to double in value.
Which doesn't produce anything.
It produces nothing. You get rich through mergers and acquisitions, through financial engineering. The source mentions that even the most celebrated industrialists in India often grow by acquiring other companies' M&A activity, not by pioneering technological breakthroughs.
That distinction is just vital, isn't it? Growing your empire by buying your competitor is a completely different activity from growing because you invented a better engine or a more efficient solar panel.
It's a different galaxy. One is financial maneuvering, the other is industrial capability. And this leads to what the source calls scale without depth.
Oh, that's a killer phrase.
It is. You look at the balance sheet of these massive Indian conglomerates, and it is huge. Billions, tens of billions of dollars in assets. But then you ask the hard questions. Do they own the proprietary technology? Can they design the next generation of the product from scratch?
And the answer is usually no.
Usually no. They license the technology or they import the core components. They have big balance sheets but very shallow capabilities. They are wide but not deep.
Scale without depth. It sounds like you're building a skyscraper on a swamp. It looks incredibly big and impressive from the outside, but there is no foundation holding it up, so if a storm comes...
It's vulnerable. And that lack of a deep foundation leads us directly to the second part of our diagnosis. If the money moves too fast, if it's always seeking quick returns, you lose your single greatest economic asset: patience, the will to wait.
Let's talk about that. Part 2. The missing will to wait. We've touched on this, but the source dives into the R&D crisis. And honestly, these numbers are the most depressing part of the reading for me.
They are stark. I mean, they're not just bad, they're in a different category of bad. The source presents a table on research and development spending as a percentage of GDP. Let's just walk through the data.
Ready.
Let's start at the top. South Korea. They invest over 5% of their entire GDP into R&D.
Over 5%. That is just, it's a massive national commitment. That's a country betting everything on its brain power, on inventing the future.
It is their entire national strategy. Then you have the OECD average, so it's the Club of Rich Developed Nations. That's about 3%.
Okay, 3%.
China is somewhere around 2.6%, and it is climbing very, very fast. They know this is the game. Now, where is India?
I have it here in the notes. It's 0.6%. 0.6.
0.6% of GDP.
That's not even in the same ballpark. That's barely in the parking lot of the ballpark.
And the source makes a crucial point here. This isn't just a marginal difference. It's
Yeah.
not like India is spending 2.8% and Korea is at 3%. The gap between 0.6% and 5% is so vast that it represents a civilizational choice.
The civilizational choice to not invest in the future.
It means you are systematically, as a nation, underinvesting in knowledge, in process innovation, in material science, in industrial engineering. You are choosing not to know how to do things.
So what is the consequence of that? Let's make it real. If I'm a manufacturer in India and my company's R&D budget is effectively zero, what am I actually doing all day?
You are an assembler. That is the term the source uses. You are buying parts that someone else in Germany or Japan or China designed, using machines someone else in Taiwan built, and you are just screwing them together.
And because I didn't design the part and I didn't build a machine, I have no real control. I'm just a pair of hands.
You're a pair of hands, which means you are competing on only one thing.
Price. How
Whoa.
cheap can my hands be?
Exactly. You are competing on wages. Who is
Yeah.
cheapest? And that is a terrible, terrible trap to be in, because there is always someone, somewhere, who is cheaper.
Today it's Vietnam.
Tomorrow it's Bangladesh or Ethiopia. If your only competitive advantage is that your workers are poor, capital will leave you the moment it finds poorer workers somewhere else. There is no loyalty.
Whereas if you invest in R&D, you become an innovator. You compete on capability. Your sales pitch is, I'm the only one in the world who can make this high-tech lens. Or, I'm the only one who has the process to make this particular battery.
Correct. You build a moat around your business with knowledge. And because India's elite refuses to wait for R&D to pay off, because R&D is risky and takes years and might not even work, India remains stuck in the assembly trap. The source puts it so bluntly, you cannot become a manufacturing powerhouse while starving your brain.
Wow. It really highlights that Make in India was trying to build a body without a brain, which I think segues perfectly into part 3. The critique of the Make in India policy itself, the source calls it a brand, not a strategy. That's a stinging rebuke.
It is, but it's backed up by a very interesting historical comparison. The source uses a table to compare the role of the state in Japan, Korea, China, and India. It basically asks the simple question, what was the government actually doing while the factories were being built?
Let's run through that because the contrast is incredible. Japan, 1950 to 1980. The post-war miracle.
Tight, obsessive coordination. The famous MITI, the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, they were like the central nervous system of the economy. The banking system was completely rewired to work for production.
What does that mean, rewired?
It means if you were a company like Toyota or Sony and you wanted to build a new, bigger, better steel mill, you got nearly unlimited cheap money. If you wanted to speculate on land in Tokyo, good luck finding a loan. The state picked winners, or at least it picked the sectors where winners should emerge and then flooded them with capital.
Okay, so that's Japan. Now, South Korea, 1965 to 1995. So it's my favorite example because it's just so intense.
Export target discipline. This is the absolute key to understanding their success. The Korean dictator at the time, Park Chung-hee, would literally call the heads of the K-balls, the big conglomerates like Samsung, Hyundai, into a room, into the Blue House, and he would say, Hyundai, you need to export $50 million worth of ships this year. Samsung, you need to export $20 million of electronics. It was that specific.
And if they met the target,
they got everything. Cheap credit, cheap electricity, government support to enter new markets. The whole state apparatus was behind them.
If they missed the target,
they were cut off. In some cases, their companies were forcibly broken up and given to a competitor who was performing better. There were real serious consequences. There was a very big stick to go with the carrot.
That is brutal. but unbelievably effective. It forces performance. You either swim or you sink.
It's discipline, pure and simple. Then you have China from 1990 to 2015, a different model, but the same principle. State capitalism plus strict capital controls. You couldn't just take your profits out of China. You had to reinvest it. The state directed everything.
Okay, so Japan had coordination, Korea had discipline, China had control. And now, compare all of that to India, from 1991 to the present.
The source has a brutal two-word description. Declarative policy.
Declared.
We declare things. We announce grand plans. We will be a $5 trillion economy. We will be a global manufacturing hub. But finance is unconstrained. Capital can go wherever it wants. And most importantly, there is no stick. Only carrots.
That's the discipline difference the source talks about. East Asian states didn't just support industry, they conditioned their support. The test was, did you meet the export target? Did you upgrade your technology?
In India, the test was the announcement launched successfully? Did we get a good photo op? Did the stock market like the press release? It was about perception, not performance.
God, that feels so painfully real. It reminds me of the critique of the PLI schemes, the production-linked incentives.
Yes, let's talk about that.
The government gives cash back to companies to manufacture certain goods in India. On the surface, it sounds good, right? It's an incentive.
It sounds good, and it's not a terrible idea in theory. But look at the details. The source analyzes the PLI schemes and says they mostly attracted assembly-level work. They failed to deepen local supply chains or facilitate any meaningful technology transfer.
Why? What was the flaw in the design?
Because the incentives were based on eligibility, not performance or punishment. If you met a certain threshold of investment or production, you got the money.
So, if I set up a factory and just import all the high-value parts from China and screw them together in India to get the subsidy, I still get the money.
In many cases, yes. There was no binding requirement that you had to source 50% of your components locally within 3 years, or that you had to export X amount to prove you were globally competitive. And there was certainly no threat that if you failed to innovate, the government would claw back the subsidy or shut you down.
We are just so reluctant to punish losers.
Because of political connections. In Korea, the state was stronger than the companies. In India, the big companies and their political donations are often stronger than the state's will to discipline them. It creates a system of what some call crony socialism or crony capitalism.
This is painting a pretty bleak picture of a system that wants the glory of manufacturing without any of the pain of discipline. But there's another element here we haven't touched on, the human element.
Right.
We can talk about capital and policies all day, but ultimately, someone has to stand on the assembly line and build the widget. Part 4, labor in the city.
This is such a profound point, and it's often ignored by economists who just look at spreadsheets and capital flows. Manufacturing, especially at scale, thrives on large, disciplined, skilled teams. You need thousands of people showing up at the exact same time every day, knowing exactly what to do.
And the source calls India's situation the informality trap. What does that mean?
Right, so everyone knows India's labor market is fragmented and mostly informal. But the source argues this isn't just about labor laws. The famous debate about how hard it is to hire and fire people. That's part of it, but it's not the core issue. The core issue is the lack of social infrastructure.
This concept just blew my mind when I was reading. The idea that Make in India talked about factories but completely forgot about where the workers would sleep, eat, or live.
Exactly. I mean, look at China. Look at the dormitory cities they built in places like Shenzhen. You can love them or you can hate them, but you can't deny what they were. They were a massive state-led investment in infrastructure to house, feed, and transport millions and millions of factory workers.
It was a total system.
It was a total system. They built vocational training centers on a massive scale.
Yeah.
They understood that to have an industrial workforce, you first needed to urbanize that workforce in a planned way.
And in India, what was our approach?
We didn't have one. We didn't build industrial housing. We didn't build mass transit links specifically for workers. We didn't invest in large-scale dormitories. So what you have is a migrant worker from a village in Bihar or UP who comes to a big city like Delhi or Bangalore.
And where do they live?
They live in a crowded, informal settlement, a slum. They have no job security, no benefits, and they send most of their money home. Eventually they get tired or sick or there's a festival and they go back to the village. They remain temporary.
And the quote from the source on this is absolutely devastating. It says, as long as workers remain temporary, manufacturing will remain temporary too.
You cannot build high-precision, high-quality, high-productivity manufacturing with a workforce that is constantly churning because they have nowhere decent and affordable to live, it's impossible.
You can't train someone to use a $1 million CNC machine if he's going to leave in 3 months because he can't afford rent in the city or his family needs him back on the farm.
You can't. It connects back to that lack of depth we talked about. We treat labor as a disposable cost to be minimized rather than a human asset to be developed and invested in.
Precisely. And this ties into the city itself. In China, the city was built for production. In India, our cities are often hostile to the poor, to the very workers we need. If a worker can't live near the factory, they can't work at the factory. It's a basic logistics problem of human bodies.
It's as simple as that.
So let's just recap where we are. We have diagnosed a massive problem. A financialized elite with no patience for long-term investment, a catastrophic underinvestment in R&D, a history of government policy that's all slogan and no discipline, and a social infrastructure that's hostile to the creation of a stable industrial workforce. It sounds hopeless.
It does. It sounds like the game is over. But the source pivots here. It asks the crucial question, is it too late?
And the answer is?
The answer is no, not yet. But the window is closing, and it's closing fast. The source mentions the unique geopolitical moment we're in. China +1 is rapidly becoming China +2. Companies are not just looking for one alternative to China anymore, they're looking for several.
So there's still a chance.
There's still a chance, simply because of India's sheer size and its domestic market. But the source is very clear. This window will close in the next 10 to 15 years. If India doesn't get its act together now, the next wave of manufacturing will go somewhere else.
So we need a new plan, a radically different plan. Enter Make in India 2.0. This is the detailed blueprint proposed in the source, and its core premise is a total 180-degree turn from the current approach.
The core premise is just beautiful in its simplicity. Stop trying to seduce capital. Start disciplining capital.
I love that. Seduction versus discipline. It's about setting terms, not just offering giveaways. So what are the goals? The source lists 5 very specific, very ambitious, strategic objectives for the year 2035.
Let's list them because they're important. Number 1, exports must hit 15% of GDP.
15%. And currently they are what, around 8% for manufactured goods?
Roughly, yes. So that's basically a doubling, a huge leap.
Yeah.
2, R&D needs to go from that pathetic 0.6% to 2% by 2030, and then 3% by 2035.
It's catching up to the rich country average.
Exactly. 3, become a top 5 global exporter in at least 5 complex sectors. Not just selling T-shirts and basic pharma, but complex machinery, electronics, things with high value.
Right. Real industrial depth.
4, create 50 million formal jobs. This is key. Not gig work, not farm labor. Formal factory jobs with benefits and security. And finally, 5, local depth. A requirement for 60% plus domestic value addition in these key sectors. No more just assembling imported parts.
These are incredibly ambitious goals. How on earth do we achieve them?
Yeah.
The blueprint proposes a new tool to replace the flawed PLI schemes. It calls them IPCs, Industrial Performance Contracts.
This is the heart of the proposal.
How is this different from the POI we just bashed?
The difference is the contract part. It's a binding legal agreement. Under an IPC, a company gets state support, maybe cheap land, maybe tax breaks, maybe R&D grants, but it is a contract with strict, non-negotiable terms.
And like what?
You must meet year-by-year export targets. You must meet technology transfer and R&D spending milestones. You must increase local sourcing by a certain percentage each year. It's all laid out in the contract.
And what if you miss the targets? What's the stick?
The stick is automatic and severe. If you miss your targets for 1 year, the incentives shrink automatically. If you miss repeatedly, your credit lines from state banks are cut. You are barred from public procurement contracts. The source explicitly says, no national champion immunity. Being a big, famous, politically connected Indian company won't save you.
That is radical. That's the Korean model we talked about. Perform or die.
It is. It's about creating a high-performance industrial ecosystem, not a protected club for incumbents. And to fund all this, the source proposes creating an ICW, an industrial credit window.
And what would that do?
This directly addresses the patience problem we started with. The state, through its banking system, creates a special mechanism for long-term, low-interest loans. We're talking 10, 15, even 20-year loans. Patient capital, specifically for these priority sectors.
But there's a catch, right? There has to be.
A huge catch. A deal breaker for the financialized elite. If you take this cheap, patient state money, there are strict caps placed on your company's dividend payouts and stock buybacks.
Wow. So you can't just take the cheap state loan and immediately give it to your shareholders.
Nope. You have to reinvest it in the business. The message is clear. Reinvest or else. This would make Wall Street or Dalal Street in Mumbai scream bloody murder.
It attacks the very heart of the financialized model we discussed in Part 1. It basically says to the owners of capital, your profit is not your own, not yet, not until the nation is industrialized. It treats the company as a national asset first and a private piggy bank second.
That's a perfect summary. And to make it all work, the blueprint also talks about ruthless prioritization. Stop trying to be good at everything. Pick your battles.
Right, focus the resources.
Yes. It categorizes sectors into tiers. Tier 1 is the high-tech, high-value stuff. Electronics, especially semiconductors, complex machinery, EVs and batteries, and defense. That's where the big state support goes.
And the other tiers.
Tier 2 is for mass job creation, advanced textiles and footwear. Still needs to be high-tech and export-oriented, but the primary goal is jobs. Tier 3 is for foundational industries where we need self-reliance, specialty chemicals and high-grade steel.
And there's a rule mentioned in the source that I found fascinating. If a sector receives this intensive support and still can't export at scale within 7 to 10 years, it gets dropped.
Ruthless. No zombie industry is kept alive by subsidies forever. If you can't learn to compete globally after a decade of state help, then you're done. This is about guided evolution. It's like natural selection, but accelerated and directed by the state.
This Make in India 2.0 plan sounds incredibly logical, incredibly powerful, but also incredibly difficult to implement. It requires a level of state capacity and political will that, well, let's just say it's a very big ask.
It is a huge ask, and that leads to the great debate that the source sets up, a hypothetical debate between the China 1995 model and the India 2025 model. This is so crucial because a lot of people in India today say, we don't need to be like China, we missed that bus, we can leapfrog.
Right, the leapfrog argument.
Yeah.
We have the internet, we have AIs, we have a booming digital economy. We don't need to build sweatshops. Let's play this out. I'll be the voice of India 2025. You be the ghost of China 1995.
Okay. I am China 1995. I am Deng Xiaoping's ghost. My argument is simple, and it is based on brutal reality. We built a modern industrial miracle on cheap labor, special economic zones, and massive physical infrastructure. You need physical scale to learn. You cannot skip steps. You have to bend metal before you can write the code for the robot that bends the metal. You cannot simulate industrialization in a PowerPoint. You must do it with your hands for decades.
And I, as India 2025, say, that is old school thinking. That world is gone. Mass manufacturing is over. Robots are doing the work now. Your cheap labor advantage is eroding. We will leapfrog all of that. We will use our unique digital public infrastructure, the India Stack, Aadhaar, digital payments, AI. We will focus on high-tech, high-margin manufacturing and services. And here's the kicker. We don't need to be totally export-dependent like you were. We have 1.4 billion people at home. We will rely on our massive domestic market to drive growth.
Okay, debate paused. Now, as the expert analyzing this, I have to say the source critiques the India 2025 position very, very heavily. It says the idea that scale can be digital is a beautiful, seductive, and very risky bet.
Why is it so risky?
The jobs question. Can you really employ 50 million or 100 million semi-skilled people with software and high-end manufacturing? High-end manufacturing is, by its nature, heavily automated. It doesn't need millions of workers. It needs a few thousand PhDs and highly skilled technicians. What do you do with the millions of people coming off the farms?
The China model absorbed them into factories.
It absorbed hundreds of millions of them. The ghost of China in 1995 would warn you. You risk being stuck in a permanent middle-income trap. You'll have a few rich tech billionaires in Bangalore and hundreds of millions of poor, underemployed people delivering their food. A service economy without an industrial base is a castle built on sand.
That is the big fear, isn't it? That we become a barbell economy. A few people at the very top, a huge number at the very bottom, and nothing in the middle. The industrial middle class never gets created.
Precisely. But the source does acknowledge that India has one new card to play that China in 1995 did not have: digital state capacity.
Right. The GST network, Aadhaar, digital payments. How does that help with building factories?
It allows for much smarter governance and discipline. Think about it. In China in 1995, how did you check if a factory actually met its export targets? You had to send an auditor with a clipboard who could be bribed or shown fake documents.
A very analog process.
Very analog. In India 2025, With the GST network and digital data from ports, you can track real-time performance of any company. You can see exactly what they're producing, what they're exporting, and who they're selling to. You can target subsidies with surgical precision. You can see if they are actually hitting their IPC targets without waiting years for an audit. So India can potentially be much smarter about its industrial discipline.
So we have the tools for discipline in a way that even Korea or China didn't. The question is, and this is the big one, do we have the will? Which brings us to the final part of this. Part 7, political courage and the high road.
This is the climax of the entire argument. It's where the rubber meets the road. The source argues that India wants to take the high road to development.
What does that mean, the high road?
It means India wants to avoid the low road that China took, the massive environmental destruction, the horrible labor conditions, the suppression of rights. India, rightly, wants to build a modern economy that is green, high-skill, and democratic.
But the source has a powerful counterpoint to this. To successfully take the high road, the state must be even more capable, not less.
Exactly. It's much, much harder to build a green, high-tech, high-wage industry than it is to build a dirty, low-tech, low-wage one. It requires more coordination, more R&D support, a better education system. It requires a government that is smarter than the market, not just one that gets out of the way and hopes for the best.
And it requires being willing to fight powerful enemies. The source is very clear about this. It lists the people who will be furious if a real Make in India 2.0 plan is ever implemented.
Let's name them. Enemy number 1, the financial markets. They despise dividend caps. They hate being told they can't make a quick buck and have to wait 10 years for a return.
Enemy number 2.
Incumbent firms. The big, established Indian companies that are comfortable in the current system. They hate real competition. They hate losing protection. They hate the idea that they might actually be allowed to fail if they don't perform.
And enemy number 3, the biggest of all.
Political donors. The whole system of political funding is based on discretionary favors. If the process for getting support is transparent, rule-based, and performance-based, like the IPCs, you can't buy favors anymore. The politicians lose their power of patronage.
So basically, the very people who fund the political system are the ones who stand to lose out the most in the short term.
Yes, and that is why the source calls this, above all, a test of political courage. It requires a political leader to look the entire economic and political elite in the eye and say, the party is over. You have to work for the nation now, not just for your share price.
The plan also mentions allowing failure. That's a really tough one in a country like India. When a big company starts to sink, the government usually steps in to save the job, save the company. A bailout culture.
No bailout culture. That's a core tenet of the 2.0 plan. If you fail to meet your IPC targets, you exit the program. If your company fails, it fails. That releases capital, labor, and resources to be used by more efficient firms. It's painful. But it's how capitalism is supposed to work. It's Schumpeter's creative destruction, but managed and guided by the state.
This has been an incredible journey through the source material. I mean, from the initial diagnosis of financialization to the shocking lack of R&D, the autopsy of the original Make in India, and this radical, detailed new blueprint. Let's try to summarize the biggest key takeaways for the listener.
I think the single biggest takeaway for me is this. India didn't fail to industrialize because it couldn't. It didn't fail because Indians aren't smart enough or hardworking enough. That's nonsense.
So what is it then?
It failed because its elite, as a class, refused to pay the price.
The price being?
The price of suppressing finance, the price of waiting for returns, the price of investing in things like R&D that don't pay off for 10 years, the price of disciplining your friends.
Make in India was a brand. It needs to become a discipline.
That's the perfect summary. And the final warning from the source is truly chilling. If this next opportunity, this China +2 window, is also missed, the next factory won't be built in India. It will be built in Africa or in Latin America. The world will move on, and history will be the only thing left to blame.
That brings us to the end, but I want to leave you, the listener, with a provocative thought. It's something that wasn't explicitly in the text but hangs over this entire discussion like a storm cloud. We talked a lot about disciplining capital. We talked about telling the richest, most powerful people in the country that they can't take profits out of their own companies for 10 years.
Right. A very authoritarian-sounding measure.
Exactly. So here's the question. Is that model, the model of Park Chung-hee's Korea, of Taiwan, of Deng Xiaoping's China, is that actually politically possible in a chaotic, vibrant electoral democracy like India? Can a democratically elected leader really tell the business elite to take a hike for a decade? Or is this kind of rapid, state-directed discipline industrialization only possible when you have an authoritarian system that doesn't have to worry about the next election, or about powerful donors, or about a critical press?
That is the billion-person question, isn't it? Can a noisy, messy democracy summon the discipline of a developmental state without becoming a dictatorship in the process?
Something to mull over. Thanks for listening to this deep dive. We'll see you next time.